Welcome to Untold Black Legend. The records didn't lie. But someone had been lying to them for decades. Margaret Hayes slid another ledger from the shelf, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. Her fingers left pale, clean streaks through the dust, evidence of how long the book had been untouched. The basement of the Charleston County Records office smelled of mildew, rust, and forgotten things. Not forgotten by accident. Forgotten on purpose. She had learned the scent quickly after accepting the position in March of 1951. Overhead, the fluorescent lights flickered, humming like tired insects. Every few seconds they dimmed, then steadied again, casting restless shadows across rows of metal filing cabinets. They stretched toward the far wall in rigid formation, iron soldiers standing guard over a history no one wanted examined too closely. As the county's new chief archivist, Margaret had been told her job was simple. Organize 40 years of birth certificates, death records, and hospital documentation. Create order from neglect. Make sense of chaos. What she inherited instead was something else entirely. The previous archivist, Mr. Thornton, elderly, soft-spoken, and oddly nervous during their brief meeting, had retired after 32 years of service. He left behind a system that looked functional at first glance but collapsed under scrutiny. Files were misdated. Birth records appeared years after deaths. Entire boxes were catalogued under hospital wings that, according to blueprints, had never existed. Some cabinets hadn't been opened since the 1920s. Their locks were stiff with rust, as if resisting interference. Organized chaos, Howard Brennan had called it during the interview, smiling as though it were charming. Nothing complicated, he'd said. Just needs someone with patience and attention to detail. Margaret had believed him. She needed to believe him. Her father's medical bills from his final illness had emptied her savings down to the last dollar. Her job at the Columbia Municipal Library vanished overnight when budget cuts erased her department like it had never mattered. Charleston promised stability, decent pay, quiet work, long days alone with paper and ink, safe, predictable things that didn't ask questions. But the longer she worked, the more the records whispered inconsistencies. Names appeared twice with different birth dates. Infants officially, stillborn, who later showed up as patients in segregated hospital wards. Death certificates signed by physicians who had been documented as out of state on the same day. And always, the same stamp in the corner. A hospital seal that no longer existed. Margaret closed the ledger slowly, her pulse quickening. This wasn't disorganization. It was revision. And somewhere above her, in offices with clean desks and polished smiles, people had known exactly what was being hidden, long before she ever accepted the job. She switched off her desk lamp, leaving the basement in partial darkness. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would start with the hospital records from 1937. Tomorrow, she would stop pretending this was an accident. Because the records didn't lie. Someone had just taught them how. The ledger in her hands was from 1927. Its leather binding cracked with age and exposure to the basement's humidity. She carried it to her desk, a scarred wooden thing that had probably been down here as long as the files, and opened it carefully, revealing page after page of birth records written in neat administrative handwriting, names, dates, times of birth, mothers listed, fathers listed, race listed. This was South Carolina in the 1920s, after all, where such classifications were considered essential information. The usual documentation meticulously recorded, except when it wasn't. Margaret's pen hovered over her notepad as she reached an entry that gave her pause. Baby listed as female European descent. Mother's name blank. Father's name blank. Place of birth, Charleston Foundling Home. Adopted. Yes, within 3 days of birth. Adoptive family, Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan Prescott of 47 Battery Street. Battery Street. That was old money territory. The kind of address that meant the Prescott family had been wealthy for generations. She made a note and continued 2 pages later. Another similar entry. Baby male, European descent, no parents listed. Born at Charleston Foundling Home, adopted within 48 hours by Mr. and Mrs. William Beaumont. Margaret frowned. She'd worked in municipal records for nearly 8 years before coming to Charleston. First in Columbia, then briefly in Greenville. She'd seen plenty of incomplete paperwork, plenty of administrative shortcuts taken by overworked clerks. Orphanages and foundling homes often received babies whose mothers wanted to remain anonymous. That part wasn't unusual, but something about these entries felt different. The blank spaces were too consistent, too deliberate. Most foundling home records at least included some information. Mother wishes to remain anonymous or abandoned at location or something to indicate the circumstances. These entries were aggressively blank, as though someone had carefully erased any trace of origin. She flipped back through the pages she'd just catalogued. There was another one on page 17 and another on page 23. Baby after baby, all marked as European, all with missing parental information, all adopted within days of arrival, always to wealthy families, always to addresses in the nicest parts of Charleston. Margaret lit a cigarette her third of the morning and stared at the ledger. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe foundling homes in the 1920s just kept poor records. Maybe wealthy families had some kind of fast-track adoption process she wasn't aware of. But her instincts, honed by years of catching clerical errors and inconsistencies, told her this was something else entirely. Over the next 3 weeks, Margaret worked her way through 16 years of records from 1922 through 1938. She established a routine. Arrive at 7 in the morning before the rest of the administrative staff, make coffee in the small break room, and descend into the basement with her notepad and a fresh pack of cigarettes. She'd work until noon, take a brief lunch at her desk, then continue until 5 or sometimes 6 o'clock in the evening. The pattern didn't just continue, it intensified. Between 1923 and 1939, she counted 147 babies that matched the same profile, listed as white or European. No parents recorded, placed through either the Charleston Foundling Home or a private organization called St. Catherine's Adoption Society. All adopted quickly, most within a week of their appearance in the system. All to wealthy families. What made Margaret's stomach turn wasn't just the missing information. It was what she found when she started cross-referencing these cases with hospital admission records from the same time period. The Charleston County Hospital kept meticulous records of every admission. Patient name, race, reason for admission, attending physician, date of admission, date of discharge. Margaret had been organizing these records as part of her archival work, boxing them by year, and creating an index system. She'd been treating it as routine paperwork until she noticed something that made her blood run cold. On a humid Tuesday afternoon in late April, Margaret spread 17 documents across her desk in the empty records room. She'd sent her assistant, a young woman named Betty, who helped with filing 3 days a week, home early with a claimed headache. She needed to be alone for this. Birth certificate on the left. Baby Catherine, European, no parents listed. Born March 14, 1931. Adopted through St. Catherine's Adoption Society on March 17, 1931. Adoptive parents, Mr. and Mrs. Charles Cunningham of South Battery Street. Hospital admission record on the right. Evelyn Porter, Negro, aged 24, admitted for childbirth March 14, 1931. Delivered a girl at 3:47 a.m. Discharged March 16, 1931 without child. Attending physician Dr. Harrison Webb. The dates matched perfectly. The hospital was the same, but according to official records, these were two completely different events that just happened to occur at the exact same time in the exact same place. Baby Catherine had no mother. Evelyn Porter had no baby. Margaret's hands trembled as she lit another cigarette. She laid out another set of documents. Birth certificate. Baby James, European descent. No parents listed. Born August 3, 1928 at Charleston County Hospital. Adopted August 6, 1928 by Mr. and Mrs. Theodore Ashford. Hospital record. Ruth Ann Jackson, Negro, age 19, admitted for childbirth August 2, 1928. Delivered a boy August 3 at 11:23 p.m. Discharged August 5 without child. Attending physician, Dr. Harrison Webb, another perfect match. Different mothers, different babies, but the same impossible coincidence. Margaret spent the rest of the afternoon matching records. By the time darkness fell and she was working by the dim light of her desk lamp, she had 17 matched sets. 17 babies who officially had no mothers born to mothers who officially had no babies. The dates aligned, the locations aligned. The only thing that didn't align was the race listed on the documents. The mothers were all listed as Negro or colored. The babies were all listed as European or white, and every single case involved Drive. Harrison Webb. Margaret stubbed out her cigarette in an overflowing ashtray and stared at the documents spread before her like evidence at a crime scene. Because that's what this was, she realized with growing horror. This wasn't administrative error or clerical confusion. This was systematic. This was organized. This was deliberate. Someone had been taking babies from black mothers and selling them as white. She should report this immediately to her supervisor. She knew. Howard Brennan was a reasonable man, a fair administrator. Surely he would see what she was seeing, understand the implications, and take appropriate action. This was evidence of crimes. Kidnapping, fraud, falsification of official documents, serious crimes that demanded investigation. But something held her back. The meticulous nature of the deception suggested this wasn't the work of one rogue clerk or even one corrupt doctor. This required coordination between multiple institutions. The hospital, the foundling home, St. Catherine's Adoption Society, and whoever processed the birth certificates and adoption papers. It required authority, respect, and the cooperation of people at multiple levels of Charleston's social and administrative hierarchy. Dr. Harrison Webb's name appeared on every single matched hospital record. That couldn't be coincidence. But Webb wasn't just any doctor. Margaret had seen his name on plaques and dedication ceremonies mentioned in old newspapers she'd cataloged. He'd been prominent, respected, influential, the kind of man whose word carried weight. Whoever had orchestrated this operation had power, and powerful people protected themselves and each other. Margaret decided to dig deeper before reporting anything. She needed more than matched documents and suspicious coincidences. She needed to understand the scope, the mechanism, the money trail. She needed evidence so compelling that it couldn't be dismissed or buried. She began staying later at the office, arriving earlier. Betty commented that Mrs. Hayes seemed very dedicated to her work. Mr. Brennan, on his occasional visits to check on the archiving progress, seemed pleased with her thoroughness. Neither of them knew what she was really doing. Margaret created a hidden filing system in the locked bottom drawer of her desk. For every matched case she found, she made careful notes. Mother's name and address, baby's listed information, adoptive family name and address, attending physician, dates. She noted patterns, repeated names, connections between families. She started mapping the network on sheets of paper she kept folded at the bottom of her purse. The Charleston Foundling Home had closed in 1943, its building now converted into apartments. Margaret drove past it one evening after work, a 3-story brick building on Ashley Avenue. Unremarkable except for the small plaque by the door indicating its former purpose. She wondered how many babies had been processed through those doors, how many mothers had handed over children they couldn't keep, how many had been told their babies were dead when they were actually being prepared for sale. But St. Catherine's Adoption Society was still operating, housed in a respectable-looking brick building on King Street, right in the heart of Charleston's commercial district. Margaret had walked past it 100 times without thinking twice. It looked exactly like what it claimed to be, a charitable organization helping children find homes. She went there on a Saturday morning in early May, dressed in her best church clothes, a navy blue dress with white collar, modest heels, a hat she normally reserved for weddings. She'd rehearsed her story carefully, practicing in front of her bathroom mirror until the lies came smoothly. The building's interior was clean and professional with tile floors and painted walls covered in framed photographs of smiling children. A reception desk dominated the front room, behind which sat a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair styled in perfect waves. Her name plate read, Mrs. Alelena Pritchard, Administrative Director. "Good morning," Margaret said, keeping her voice pleasant and slightly uncertain. The tone of someone who wasn't quite sure they were in the right place. "I'm hoping you might be able to help me. I'm trying to locate information about an adoption that may have gone through St. Catherine's." Mrs. Pritchard's smile was immediate and professional, but Margaret noticed it didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, dear. We're always happy to help with inquiries. What sort of information are you seeking?" "It's about my cousin," Margaret said, using the cover story she'd prepared. "She was adopted as an infant in 1932. Our grandmother recently passed and left a small inheritance to all her grandchildren. We're trying to locate Catherine, "That's my cousin," to notify her of the inheritance. The family always knew she was adopted, but we never knew through which agency. "I see." Mrs. Pritchard pulled out a ledger from beneath the desk. "And what was the adoptive family's name?" "Cunningham. Mr. and Mrs. Charles Cunningham. They lived on South Battery Street." Something flickered across Mrs. Pritchard's face so quick Margaret almost missed it. Recognition perhaps or weariness. "I'm afraid our records are confidential, dear Mrs. Pritchard said, closing the ledger without looking at it. "Adoption files are sealed for the protection of all parties involved. It's state law. I'm sure you understand." "Of course, I do understand the need for privacy, but this is a legal matter, an inheritance. Surely, there's some way to at least confirm whether the adoption went through your agency. I'm not asking for details about her birth family or anything sensitive. The law is quite clear." Mrs. Pritchard's smile had frozen into something less friendly. "We cannot confirm or deny any adoption without proper legal authorization. A court order or written permission from the adoptee themselves. If your cousin wishes to learn about her adoption, she would need to petition the court to unseal the records. But how can she petition if we can't even locate her to tell her about the inheritance? That's unfortunate, but I'm afraid it doesn't change the legal requirements." Mrs. Pritchard stood, indicating the conversation was over. "I'm sorry. I can't be more helpful. Have you tried hiring a private investigator? They often have resources for locating missing family members." Margaret thanked her and left, her mind racing. The woman's reaction had been too smooth, too practiced. This wasn't standard bureaucratic adherence to privacy laws. This was a wall specifically built to keep people from asking questions. Mrs. Pritchard had recognized the Cunningham name. Margaret was certain of it, and she'd shut down the inquiry with practiced efficiency. Over the following weeks, Margaret continued her research with increasing caution. She varied her routine, sometimes arriving late instead of early, sometimes working through lunch, sometimes leaving at exactly 5 o'clock like a normal employee. She didn't want to establish a pattern that might draw attention. She created a second set of notes that she kept at home, hidden in a hatbox at the back of her bedroom closet. If someone confiscated her work files, she'd still have a backup. She was beginning to understand she was investigating something that powerful people wanted to stay buried. The count of matched cases grew steadily. 147 became 163, then 184, then 207. The sheer scale was overwhelming. Margaret started analyzing the adoptive families more carefully, looking for patterns beyond just wealth. She pulled property records, cross-referenced social announcements in old newspapers, traced family connections through marriage records and business partnerships. The families formed an interconnected web of Charleston's elite. Prescott's married Beaumonts. Cunninghams went into business with Ashfords. They belonged to the same country clubs, attended the same Episcopal churches, sent their children to the same private schools. They served on the same boards of directors, supported the same political candidates, socialized at the same exclusive gatherings, and they'd all adopted babies through either the Charleston Foundling Home or St. Catherine's Adoption Society during roughly the same two-decade period. Babies with no documented parents. Babies that appeared in the system as cleanly white. Babies that could be absorbed into these wealthy white families without raising questions. In early June, Margaret made a discovery that transformed her understanding of the operation's financial structure. She was reviewing old financial records from Charleston County Hospital, dusty ledgers that documented every payment in and out of the institution, when she found a series of entries that didn't make sense. Regular payments to something called the Carolina Children's Welfare Bureau. Substantial payments, $500 here, $800 there, sometimes over $1,000, all annotated vaguely. Welfare services rendered, child placement, administrative costs, bureau consultation fees. Margaret had never heard of the Carolina Children's Welfare Bureau. Despite having cataloged thousands of documents related to child welfare services, orphanages, and charitable organizations operating in South Carolina during the 1920s and 1930s, she spent 2 days tracking the organization through business registration records filed with the state. The Carolina Children's Welfare Bureau had been established in 1922 and dissolved in 1940. Its registered address was the same building that housed St. Catherine's Adoption Society. Its founder and sole director, Dr. Harrison Webb. Dr. Harrison Webb, the pediatrician whose name appeared on every single matched hospital admission record. Dr. Harrison Webb, who'd been a prominent citizen, a respected doctor, a beloved community figure. Dr. Harrison Webb, who'd apparently been running a private organization that received substantial payments from a public hospital for vaguely defined welfare services. Margaret pulled every financial record she could find related to the Carolina Children's Welfare Bureau. The hospital payments were just the beginning. She found payments from Charleston County's Child Welfare Department, payments from private individuals, wealthy individuals with familiar names, payments listed as donations or charitable contributions or adoption facilitation fees. Over 18 years, the Carolina Children's Welfare Bureau had received over $300,000